In Series 4 of the 50 Faces Podcast of 2023, we gathered 10 guests who share a passion for excellence in very different fields. We hear from a legendary business builder about how he closes the deal.
You have to have thick skin. The conversion rate is probably something like 2 to 3% of the people with whom we're having a reasonably active dialogue. You have to early on understand that you have to pace yourself.
A hedge fund manager shares the humbling effect of market downturns.
87 was really hard. It was depressing. It was disorienting. But each time you go through an experience like that, if you figure out how to survive, if you realize that life goes on, that whatever you may have left is still worthwhile, it was really hard for me to deal with the consequences of the financial loss and the emotional loss that comes along with those kinds of circumstances.
A CIO reveals her ups and downs and the importance of learning to take risk and of having a backup plan.
That's something I hear a lot. There's no plan B. There always should be a plan B, because even if you're willing to take risk, you should be constantly evaluating whether or not that risk makes sense with new information that you have. I think we learn as much from the failures as we do from our successes sometimes.
A serial builder of banks and financial institutions who started her career decades ago tells us what has changed and what has not, and sharpens the focus on what kind of mentors really matter.
The change in relationship between professional men and professional women is in some ways more important than the role model for the woman to woman.
An angel investing expert tells us about the school he has formed to bring angel investors to the table and fill the gaps in their expertise.
People like me don't invest. I can't afford to invest, and I can't add value to entrepreneurs. And we demystify all three of them because we prove that anyone can invest. Diverse people can invest. Women can invest and should invest. Ownership is important, okay? We prove that you don't have to be rich to get started.
A guest who studied game theory at University of Berkeley during the flower power era relates it to risk-taking and asset allocation. And he offers up an antidote to AI, the value of humans in interpreting information.
One of my bosses said to me, "You're much brighter than I am, but I'm much richer than you are." And the point of saying that wasn't just to be rude to me, it was to say that you can be far too clever for your own good. And I've always remembered that, you may be the brightest person in the room. It doesn't mean to say you're the best person in the room, or you're going to be the best performer.
An EM debt specialist quickly learned that taking a position was important.
My new boss asked me what my favorite trade was, what risk I had on. And I told him I didn't have anything on. I didn't know what I was doing. And he scolded me, and he told me that next time he asks that question, I can never answer it that way. That over the next 2 years, I can move any position that I had that was losing money into his risk book, and that he expected me to lose him $2 million over the next year, but to make him $40 million over the next 4 years.
A private wealth manager describes what drives her.
I just realized that after all these years of working hard and traveling and client meetings and really just focused on being successful and getting promoted and making more money, I sort of stepped back and felt like, well, what is it all about? What is it all for?
We examine the biases inherent in the work we do and ask why to start with the who.
Before we get to purpose and the why, we might begin to ask questions as to who we are and recognize that each of us has many different identities. We are partners, we are parents, we are children, we are workers and co-workers, we are sports fans, we are neighbors, we are part of a family. It's not in just thinking about, well, not just what I want and not just what I want to do, but who is it that I want to be, and realizing that there are multiple versions of you now and in the future. And a really, really good financial plan is going to tap into those multiple identities.
And finally, we hear from a real-life Ted Lasso about his commitment to a League Two football team and how seeing an underdog thrive is the passion that drives him.
Don't be frightened to fail, just be frightened not to try. It's probably the only way to do it, is because what's the worst that can happen? As long as you give 100% in what you're trying to deliver and do it. But also be open and transparent with what you're doing and why you're doing it. Be open, be transparent, have a good rationale for why you were doing what you're doing, things won't always work out. But at least if you've got that approach and you've documented it and people understand why you made the call that you made, then most of the time you'll be supported.
So tune in every Tuesday and Thursday from June 27th through early August, where we'll release a new episode of the series twice a week. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. All of our content is available on the 50 Faces Hub. Remember, if you like what you heard and would like to support our content and our mission to amplify diverse voices, you can support us on Patreon. Just search for 50 Faces Podcast or click on the link in our show notes. This podcast was made possible by the kind support of Alvine Capital Management, a London-based specialist investment advisor and placement boutique.